All right, let me go over a demo of the Optime strategy and analytics modules. So a small amount of prep to Optime itself. It's a web-based technology. There is an operations side for the other modules, a credential, schedule, staff, etc., and a mobile app that goes along with it for the professionals to see everything about their scheduled shifts, etc. But today is just centered on strategy and analytics. The way that we can set up users within that is typically through this admin module, where we set up various roles and the users fall into those roles. Probably something very similar to what you're used to with other systems. So with that, we can give access for people to see a strategy or certain analytics. They can actually create their own. We can allow distributions of those, and I'll get into that a little bit further. But that's how it's all set up. Um, Everything with Optime is web-based, so if you have the internet, you can access it. And the strategy itself is this module, and this particular part of it is a strategy session. And let me kind of dive in from here. So typically we do a strategy ahead of time. It usually falls into a budgeting cycle, right? So if everyone has their yearly budget that they're going to be creating, we typically recommend doing the strategy a month or so ahead of that yearly budget, with all the meetings and stuff that go into that, to determine what type of strategy you need to have for your healthcare units. Okay. And when we're creating a strategy, you can create it off of any time frame. So I gave the example of the budget, the yearly cycle, but people can do this for any other time frame that they want. So often people will do it for the budget, the yearly, but they might do it quarterly as well. And even every once in a while, every couple months, they might have a need for it because maybe they have some pretty strong shifts in what their census is doing, and they want to act on that. And they could do it from the strategy here as well, which I'll show you. So I'm going to just dive into one of these. This is FY26 strategy demo. Actually, let me get out of this. I'm going to go to a different one. Let me show you an example of some differences, just so that I can show you some multiple streams. So this one has two streams. And what we like to think of as stream is you can have one that's based off of how you normally run. But let's say there's other parts of the equation that a nurse manager, a director, maybe one of the chief officers want to see what happens if X is done to a unit or a specialty or a series of units or facilities. That's where you can create multiple streams. So in this silly example, but again, it's just a demo, we have our main unit, right? And that runs fundamentally as it normally does, but with new census, maybe some updated pay rates. But let's say the model of care doesn't change, right? However many staff take care of however many patients and each type of staff member. Let's say that doesn't change, right? So that's your main here. But now what we've done is we created a new stream and said, hey, what happens if we add an 8-hour shift somewhere, right? And you can do that on the fly. It only takes a couple minutes. You already created all the other parts of the mainstream, so you can carry them over to this 8-hour. And all I really need to do is this third step here, adjust it to include some degree of 8-hour. This is a very minimal amount, but through the minimal amount, I could see what kind of cost savings I could come up with. And here it looks like a decent chunk of savings. The cost per worked unit seems to go down considerably as well, just incorporating 3% of 8-hour shifts. So again, it's just an example, but it allows you, as I get into the demo, how to customize it to really open it up if you want to. We have units that maybe have an appetite for that, or you could leave it very well structured to how they're currently operating, but have a better, more sophisticated approach for the budgeting cycle by using the strategy. Okay, so let me dive into one of these. I'm going to open up the 8-hour stream, and here the way this works is it always goes top to bottom, and so I have to do the demand before I do the next steps. But after the demand, I put the model of care into the equation, and the model of care, as I said before, is, let's say you have 4 or 5 different job types in a unit or a series of units that you're making a strategy for, or multiple facilities. You can create it for whatever you'd like. And each one of those job skills or job classes has a different amount of ratio to it, right? So maybe if you're a registered nurse, in an ICU, you can take care of 2 patients for every nurse. Maybe it's an open heart case, or open heart cases are in that unit, and so it has to be a 1-to-1. And maybe in a telemetry, it's a 1-to-4 or 1-to-5, right? So you can put all that into the model of care step. I won't really labor into that part of it because you're just putting factual information in. There's no modeling that's being done at that point. You can also factor in different types of fixed staff. If you have nurse managers, if you have transporters, charge nurses that are either unencumbered or encumbered, you could factor those into the model of care step as well. But anyway, I'll kind of gloss over that, and I'm talking about it right now before, and I'll get into the other 3 steps a little bit more. But so you start with your demand, go to your model of care. After the model of care, we're going to take the information of the demand and model of care and optimize it for the shift configuration. So that's where you're going to incorporate what shift start times you have available, what's the duration of those, and an optimization model is ran off of all the steps before it to figure out how best we can serve these units or series of facilities that are made up of this strategy. And then the final step is workforce optimization, where again it's a different optimization model that runs through. This is where pay rates start to be incorporated, overtime, non-productive, and that part of it. So let me get into the demand plan. Nearly every one of these steps and other steps in the modules up here, if it has a lengthy amount of inputs, we typically put it through what we call a wizard. So it's a multi-step approach to get to an end state. We find that novice users, beginner users, they can digest small amounts of information and fill out that page, then go to the next one, rather than looking at a page of 60 inputs and be overwhelmed and never really get around to it, right? We want it to be easily digestible. So if I get here to the defined scenario, I'm going to state what my time period is for. Am I working with a certain type of unit of service? You could do patient days, patient hours, RVUs, and there's 2 or 3 others that you could put in there. And honestly, this is just a feed from what we get from admit discharge transfer data or your census data. And so different units might work different ways. Like ORs might work off of RVUs, ERs might work off of RVUs or patient hours. And then other units might look at patient days or midnight census or whatever happens to be. All that could be used through that step. What kind of historical data are we going to be looking at? This is an easy way that you could parse out. This is by year, but you could change it to by quarter or weekly if you want to get a little bit more in the weeds with it. For instance, let's say you were doing this for this PEDS unit like we're looking at, and there was a renovation that was done in Q3 of 2022, right? Maybe you just want to ignore that data because it just would mess up the different types of census that we're looking at, the demand. So you could easily just uncheck that part and use all the other data to run your model off of. And this step here is already the units that we're looking at. Right here, it's just going to be a PEDS unit, but this is set up in the step before it when we're actually just creating the strategy itself. And then we go to step 2, and there are about 4 different types of statistical models we can use here. It really just depends on the unit or series of unit as to which one maps the best. But you can look at the data after this gets compiled. It already runs the model once we select this. And again, some of them have little adjustments that might make the makeup of the demand look a little bit better to the person that is looking at it, right? But we can look at it by the seasonal, by the day of week, by the hour of the day, and the day of week. And then we go to the 3rd step. And here is where we're going to have a driver off of the rest of the strategy. So the driver is these demand ranges. You can choose from 1 to 5 ranges. What that means is dependent on the census, right? If I were to tap on the low one here, it's going to highlight the low weeks, right? So you see all those ones are lower. And basically this is where the theory of the strategy and what would be ideal for the budget meets the operations of what the units can actually achieve, right? So we could open this up to make 10 demand ranges if we want, and the data and the cost savings would look much better because it's all running through these models. The more that you parse it out, the better it can staff to 10 levels as opposed to just 3 levels. The problem that you run into typically is how it runs into the operations, and going into week to week, month to month, if you switch the amount of staff that are happening 10 different ways, it's going to confuse people. We find in the past that 3 or 4 levels of demand ranges is typically the best way to do it. You get, you know, 95+% of the same savings, but operationally they can focus and know, okay, we're going into a low week, we're going into a high week, we're going into a medium week. They can adjust the plans, and the schedule does it for them in the Optime system to meet that based off of, if it's a low week, maybe you don't have 4 staff members on Wednesdays and Thursdays, maybe you only have the 3 on the day shift, right? Little things like that is what we're talking about here. So that's just one thing that we do that's going to be used for the rest of the strategy. And then there's other data points here. If I were to unselect that, I can go back to the full view and we could look at it by day of week, the amount of variability that's happening day of week, and then how that looks like hour of day and day of week. Okay, so once we're happy with our demand, and sorry, I didn't mention it, but I think you probably saw it in the demo. There is a way when you look at the demand, if there's like a particular week that looks a little bit odd, and maybe it scaled the model down, you could do micro adjustments if you want. You can adjust certain weeks at a time and bump it up by 10%, 5%, whatever it is, for those little oddities that might show up along the way. All right, model of care, I already talked about. I'll show it to you just so that it is part of this. But again, we are just looking at a series of units, the job skills of that unit, and we are putting in a ratio. Every hour of the day gets a certain ratio here, but you could put in exceptions. You could put in fixed providers, providers that are encumbered with some degree of patient care and the percentage of that care. Fixed shifts, so if you have like an educator that comes in from Monday through Friday, you can add that here as well. Any additional FTEs or any specific capability requirements. It can all get recorded here, and again, it's going to use the demand and the model of care for the future states. Okay, so before I get into shift optimization, I'll go ahead and get into it so that it can go to step 1 here. But it's very important that and I'll talk about it for the rest of the demo, is when we talk about the word of misalignment. So misalignment can mean different things in different environments. What we talk about is any overstaffing is bad, any understaffing is also bad. To us, they are like absolute values, right? We don't ever want to be overstaffed for a particular hour or understaffed for a particular hour if we can fix it. And so when we say that we're trying to get to 0 misalignment, it means that you are perfectly staffed every hour of the day for every job skill, for every unit that's running through the strategy, both in the strategy, in the analytics, and also obviously for the operational standpoint as well for the other modules. So everything else through here is going to be focused on the misalignment, and there'll be heat maps around it, and it's really just focusing everything to be as accurately staffed as possible for every hour of the day, day of the week, week of the year, right, and year over year. But the first step of the shift selection, shift optimization part is I'm going to say, what can this unit handle? Okay. In this case, we have the 8-hour option and the 12-hour option. And then when can these shifts start? 7, 11, and 7 p.m. The relative tolerance and the time limit is based off of how long I want the model to run and how, the tolerance I want to allow it to achieve the outcome that we're getting at. And then, of course, the units are still selected there. Shift mix is a big part of the step. So here I'm saying I'm okay with the RNs having 12-hour shifts on 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The 8-hour shifts, I don't want that to start at 7 p.m. I only want it to be available for 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. And then we have some other caveats here, which is the rollover and the minimum required coverage. So because we're only dealing with a small amount of 8-hour shifts and mainly 12-hour shifts, the issue that we could run into is what if they are or what if they have an influx of patients, or patients haven't been recorded and sent home accurately in the data that we get for ADT, discharge transfer data, or census data. We don't want to staff for those blips of 1 hour, and that's what the rollover is. Okay, so I'm saying if 1 hour is over or understaffed, that's fine as long as it corrects itself for the next hour and the hour before it. Okay, so you can adjust that if you want to. It's completely, it's a user input here, but typically it's just roll over 1 hour most of the units that we work with. And the minimum required coverage is along the same way, which is what is the minimum amount of coverage hourly that we can obtain while still like blessing that demand range, right? The low, medium, and high. And so on the view result, I'll kind of show you what that looks like. I'm going to ignore the middle steps. This is just taking information from model of care. So if there were fixed shifts, if there were additional FTEs, it would grab that information, right? It literally takes it from that model of care step, plugs it in so that it can be factored into the costs in the next step. It doesn't do any part into the actual results in the shift optimization area. But if I go to view results, okay, I have just two different job types for this particular unit, and it gives me some overall information. I can see how well it's staffed, what the requirement was, right? So we have a little bit of overstaffing, but overall pretty much in line. Same with the techs. They are very much in line. I can look at the hours per worked unit, what the target ratio is of each. So we have a 4-to-1 in the RNs and an 8-to-1 for the PCTs. What was the effective ratio that our model ran, right? And then what our misalignment look like. So overall, for the low, mediums, and high for the whole year, we have a misalignment of 4.4%. That's in green. It's pretty good. Okay, a little bit of overstaffing, a little bit less understaffing, and then the PCTs is at 10.1%, a little bit more overstaffing, a little bit more understaffing. And again, this is where you are playing with the shift mix. And if I were to open it up in total and said we can have start times at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., all the way up to 11 p.m. and midnight, and I could have shift durations for anything from 4 hours up to 12 hours, right? And I reran this, it would probably make it perfect where there is no misalignment. So the usually misalignment, again, we're trying to get it as close to 0% as possible, but because of the constraints I put in the shift mix where I'm only having some small amount of 8 hours and mainly 12-hour shifts, that's where in the end state, the model can only do as good as it could possibly do based off those inputs. So again, every unit would be a little bit different from that regard. If I'm in a unit that doesn't have a lot of demand variability, let's say it's very much usually at like 100% occupancy, like ICU or something. Again, it would be very easy to do solely 12-hour shifts because not much changes, right? So when you get into variable units like a pediatrics here, that's where you're going to see the misalignment blip up, and you really can't correct it without different duration of shifts. And again, the good part about the strategy here is it kind of lends itself to bring that out into the open. All right, and then if I open up one of the demand ranges, I can highlight and see, hour by hour, day of week, what does it look like? It's a heat map. It tells you how much the staffing looks like on each one of these days with 8 hours, with 12 hours. We have an administrator here that's factored in as well, what the average census comes out to. It's all very useful information to see how well it did for this optimization model to staff based off of our inputs. And you can do that for each one of those or the techs. All right, and the last step that I'm going to go into here is a workforce optimization. So workforce optimization, we've done everything around our shifts, demand, model of care. When we come here, we are going to be looking at two big things. Holidays is the smallest of the three, but the big things we're going to look at is resource. So if I stop here, we're factoring the holiday pay rate at 1.5 times. Again, just whatever the facility happens to be going off of. Also, the travelers or the agency, what are their typical contract lengths? Is it 13 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? And again, that's just a variable input. The relative tolerance and the time limit is again based off the model, how long I'm going to let it run to find the best outcome. So let me dig into step 2. This is a big one. So here I have all my different types of resource types. We can add to this, we could subtract from it, and then we have an hourly rate against one of them. So maybe on full time for RNs, maybe you have like 4 different types of RNs based off seniority. You could put each one in here and set thresholds against it. That's not a problem, right? And then we could always bring this in for the next strategy as well through the pay rate profiles. I'm saying what their minimum required amount to work per week is. These are 12-hour shifts typically, so it's 36 instead of the 40. And then I have other variables if I want to set mins and maxes for the FTE or the mins and maxes for the percentages. I often do that for overtime. Sometimes you might do it for agency too. So for overtime, if we open that up, maybe a certain unit always runs at like 10 to 12% overtime. and maybe ultimately you save money through doing that, and it's great, but maybe the staff get overworked and you have a lot of turnover in that particular unit or series of units. Very bad thing to happen, because then you start spending a lot more money on orientation and preceptors, hiring, all those practices. So even if it does show that they could do 12% overtime, capping it at a certain amount where it's still available, because some staff maybe certainly like to have that option. We still kind of cap it to a more normalized amount so that it's still available, but people don't feel overworked for any particular week. So you set this up for the variety of units and job skills of all the pay rates. And again, if you set a pay rate profile, you can save it. And then if you need to add 2% to that particular profile, it's much easier to do. And then your strategy could just pick up on it. All right, now we go to non-productive. Non-productive is a big one. So what we like to say is, if you know your demand well, that is one side of the coin. But if your non-productive is not handled appropriately and audited and looked at from a modeling perspective, if you have a call out tomorrow morning, it's as if 5 new patients came in the door for a med surg unit if they're at a 1-to-5 ratio. It's just as important, right, to know what's going on at the non-productive. That includes LOAs, education, orientation, preceptors, jury duties, vacations, unapproved leave, sick, everything you can name it, it's all put in here. And again, it gets modeled off of, so it's going to take this into the consideration for this last step. And so again, it's a very vital part of what an organization should be looking at, and to keep on top of, particularly for the model and the strategy that we're doing here. Again, holidays, it's pretty cut and dry. I'm just putting in which dates have holidays, how many holidays are in those particular weeks, and so it gets factored into the results. And if I go to view results here, now I'm going to look at everything from a cost and FTE perspective. I can see my cost per worked unit, hours per worked unit. For each one of the units or the job skills, I could see what amount was non-productive, what amount was productive, what the cost came out to. I can tap on any one of these. I could take out the staffed hours because that's the majority of it, and I can see what the seasonality looks like for all the other types of environments we're looking at. Here I could take out full-time and see where we're going to largely use part-time, where the overtime would occur, floats, per diem, travelers, etc. And then in the end, again, I will still have some small amount of overstaffing like we already saw in the previous step, and it gets recorded here so we can know about it. So as these weeks are occurring, if everything looks great, outside of the non-productive, that's still something that you'd want to audit, but maybe you could get a couple more people for vacation in these couple weeks to dwindle it. But as far as the information that we have available for these inputs and the model of non-productive and all the other things we talked about, this is the best case that this optimization model could come up with to make the best strategy for your budgeting period. And then we have reporting off of this. You can take this out. It tells you all the different variables of what this would amount to. It can go into a position control, and this is the strategy. So early on, I said people typically do this before a budgeting cycle, and they also might do it quarterly. Why might you do it quarterly? Because things change. Let's say we did the budgeting cycle back in November, and here we're enacting that budget right from the strategy, and we're heading into Q2 now, maybe even into Q3. Things change along the way. You might have different variables that have come up, some external environment changes, and you want to rerun it to make sure that your agency and your overtime and these other variables are still kind of holding strong to what was done back in November. So you don't have to adjust your budget. You certainly can, but it's just a way to usually have insight into your agency needs for that next upcoming quarter, because again, they're typically on 12 or 13 week contracts. And so if it said originally in November that you would need 8 contracts of RNs in Q3, and you rerun it and it says you no longer need the 8, maybe you just need the 6, or maybe you need 10 now. It's good to have that more real-time information available to you. All right, so once we publish a strategy, it leads into recommendations. These are where we would come. Typically, this would be like a director or a executive or something like that. They can come and just kind of get a standpoint on what each unit is doing, next week into, I think, 16 weeks into the future. It tells you what the daily census is expected to be, what the patient days, how many FTEs you need to staff, what the non-productive expectation is for those particular weeks, and then what your shift grid looks like. And then from there, your effective ratio for RNs and extenders. This is actually a different unit than the PEDS one. That's why it looks a little bit different from the 4s and the 8s, but that's okay. So you can see where it dips down, where it comes back up. And the important thing here is, so again, this is typically for directors or executives. If the system is using the Optime technology, all of the operations of the scheduling take all this information and plug it into the schedule. So this is not something you have to come and look here and then remember it or write it down to go to the schedule to enact on it. Everything flows in from the recommendations to the schedule to the staffing, and they can keep up with it to know exactly tonight shift, right? It's 4:20 p.m. for me. Tonight shift, I could still see what the expected census is for tonight, and then as tonight occurs, it'll come and be an actualized census. As we get new feeds of census and workload data, these get micro adjusted. The model continuously runs based off of each one of those feeds, whether it's hourly, daily, weekly, however we can get the feed from the system. And again, it doesn't change a monumental amount, but it does change a little bit, and it constantly keeps up to date to know what to expect for the next week and weeks into the future. And if I were to tap on any one of these, I can drill down into that particular pay period and look at, particular days, what the census is expected to do, and then the staffing, of course. But again, the staffing here is good to know, but if you are utilizing the staffing and scheduling modules, it gets plugged in automatically to the demand needed for your supply of those particular units. All right, and now I will show you a little bit of analytics. So analytics is everything we showed is kind of preemptive stuff to lead to a better experience of less chaos, better for your operations, right, and downstream effect. And then analytics is what happened. How did things actually turn out, from a productivity, recruitment, anything that you would possibly want to look at. So let me go to dashboards here. We have a lot of baked in dashboards. They encompass various widgets of various data points, and these are graphs or pie charts or whatever happens to be. Each widget has its own filters and sorting and parameters and properties around it, and they're all specialized to that particular widget. We have about 60 widgets. If anyone finds one that they don't see, like if they need another one available to them, they are not hard to create. We can create them pretty quickly. There's also access in analytics to other things. If you want to do queries through SQL or create your own reports, you could certainly do that as also. But then if I come here and let's say I do have a particular dashboard of one I'm about to show you or any of the managed dashboards, you could also set up distributions. So each one of the widgets, you can set it so that it will constantly stay up to date. So as we get new data, the new data feeds to the widgets and these dashboards, and I could send it on a recurring, let's say a 2-week interval to different audiences, right, through this dashboard distribution. And people can look at it through an email link. They can click on it. They get access to all the data. It works out very well. They don't have to get into the system. They just use it directly from the email link, and it brings it up on the web browser. People love to use that feature. Or they can get in and they can make adjustments to it and change their filters or units or job skills, whatever they want to look at. The other two that I'm going to show you are the more involved ones where we custom created these dashboards based off of many years of going to productivity meetings between finance and operations and tried to find a way that they could come out of those meetings without so many gray